Welcome to Bangladesh Feminist Oral History Project presented by Bangladesh Feminist Archives. I'm your host, Tanvir Anai. This project brings together intergenerational Bangladeshi feminists whose work across classrooms, courtrooms, streets, and stories continues to shape our past, present, and futures. Today, I'm deeply honored to be joined by Professor Firdous Azim, a literary critic, feminist theorist, and activist whose voice has reverberated across Bangladesh's feminist and intellectual landscapes for decades. Dr. Azim is a professor of English at BRAC University, where she served as the chair of the Department of English and Humanities for many years. She received her PhD from the University of Sussex in 1989, and her work spans postcolonial studies, feminist thought, literary criticism, and women's movements in South Asia. But to introduce her only as an academic would be incomplete. She is a long-standing member of Naripokkho, one of the Bangladesh oldest feminist activist collectives. Through campaigns like the Forgotten Woman of 1971 and the Intervention in Policy and Pedagogy, she has helped shape public discourse on women's rights, secularism, and feminist memory in Bangladesh. Her published works include The Colonial Rise of the Novel, Infinite Variety, Women in Society and Literature, an edited volume like Complex Terrence, Islam, Culture and Women in Asia, and Mapping Women's Empowerment. She is also a former member of the editorial collective of Feminist Review and sits on the editorial boards of Inter-Asia Cultural Studies, Goal, and more. In her classrooms, writings, and organizings, she has championed feminist futures that are grounded, sharp, and expensive. Firdosapa, let's start with your journey. So, what were the experiences or influences that first shaped your feminist consciousness?
It's very difficult to pinpoint a particular moment or a particular incident. But I really think that as you have concentrated on the academic side of my journey, I would think of it as literature. The literature I was reading, especially 19th century English literature, also goes to show my interest in our colonial past, concentrated a lot on the position and status of women, on women's struggles. And I used to devour books like Jane Eyre or even Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. And all the time I would wonder how that reflected in our lives. This should have naturally led me on to become a writer, something I have not become and something I regret till this day. I wish I was a fiction writer and not any of these other things that you have mentioned. But at that moment, I was also in university, and we were a group of friends who were always discussing issues as they came along. And 70s Bangladesh was a very exciting time, very, very exciting time. We had just become, something like today, we had just become independent. So independence meant a lot of things for us, young girls at that time. We also were very disappointed with the fruits of independence. I'm amazed at the kind of parallels that we can draw today. But despite all our disappointments, there was a huge hope and dimensions that were opening up. And this led us to form collectives, in a way. We started discussing books, we started discussing whatever there was of feminist theory around and discovering ourselves. This led to the creation of Naripokkho. But Naripokkho came in 1983. So this feminist consciousness, which was sparked by colonial literature, found expression in a woman's collective in 20th century Bangladesh, in newly independent Bangladesh, which I think sparked more and more. So it is through friendships, through readings, through etc. Our own experiences. In Naripokkho, we have these workshops where we ask for what is it that sparked your consciousness as a woman? For myself, I cannot pinpoint a particular moment, but I grew up in Chittagong, which was a very conservative society, and the restrictions on my movement were there. All of these restrictions that I felt somehow became free when we moved to Dhaka in 1972. And it was all right to go on rickshaws and all that. In Chittagong, we were always accompanied by somebody. But somehow from 70s, we were not. So to me, that was freedom enough to be able to take a rickshaw and go anywhere. So, yeah. So there's not one particular incident, but life in a middle class, I would say upper middle class Bengali home was very restricted. And those restrictions I would chief under. But I don't know whether they were just restrictions of gender, but also restrictions of class in Chittagong at any rate. In Dhaka and Dhaka University, those things didn't work anymore. And Dhaka University itself was a safer place in those days, despite all the gun-toting people that we hear about. Yeah, I suppose that's what I'd say. It's a journey rather than a particular incident.
Thank you, Professor. It was such a profound and such a lovely, I would say, answer. Um, as you said, like I mentioned your academic life as well, but your activist life is also being very much celebrated. So my next question is about Naripokkho. So, when did Naripokkho enter your life, and what made you commit to collective feminist organizing for decades?
Well, Naripokkho entered my life before Naripokkho came into being. As I said, Naripokkho is a group of friends, and Shireen and I were friends since university days. But our paths were together and yet separate because she was more into activism of various kinds. She was involved in many things, whereas I was going more towards the academic side. And so I was a very bookish young girl, which is not very attractive in many ways. But Shireen was very inspiring, and she inspired other women to join. And and I was always, as I said, looking for what I'm reading in my books. How do I express it in life? And expressing it in life, I found a collective organization was the best way. The group of women which came together, of which Khushi, whom you've interviewed, Lily, these people were from other walks of life, but we could come together and discuss what affected our lives and then what affected women's lives in general. How do we reach out to women? And there was no better way than the collective. The other thing I want to mention about Naripokkho is that we were very clear that there is no difference between us and them. The NGO movement then was very strong, and as you know, the NGO movement was emphasizing a lot on women. But women were the recipients of whatever they were doing. So the women were them, and we as NGO workers or NGO leaders would be meeting their wants. But we here wanted a collective where our demands, our needs, our understanding was applicable to all. It wasn't that, oh, I'm in this position and I'm giving you my wisdom and my knowledge, but we are collectively developing it. That was the spirit. Yeah, and that was the most attractive part about feminist organizing. And I also realized that this is feminist scholarship. When you think of all the ways that all the subjects, academic subjects were recast in the 80s. It was the same thing. Anthropology was a big factor. Anthropology had the biggest, the object of investigation, and me, the investigator. the thing that I would have to place myself in the investigation. The researcher would have to place him or herself was very important aspect. Similarly with literature, when you read a text, and even today one of the first things I tell in class, because again we are still reading 19th century English literature, why are we reading this? Why are we in 21st century Bangladesh reading this? This is the question we need to ask. And from there, you analyze the novel, you analyze the thing and all that. But first, you place yourself squarely in your investigation. So I don't think it's navel gazing. Many people call this navel gazing, but it's not. It's it's an involved academic and activist person where you are involved directly. That's what I think.
Thank you so much. And I do have a soft corner for the people who are also academic and as well activists, the academia
You're
activists.
one.
Great. Yeah,
You are one.
absolutely. I'm also one. I'm going there slowly, slowly, but I have immense respect and also you're one of the, encouragements whenever I go and see myself as there. So keep encouraging us, Appa. So my next question is for you is that you have often said that literature and theory are political. So, how has feminist and post-colonial theory informed your teaching and writing?
Well, it's very easy to say that. How has that theory informed my activism is more difficult. But so let me start with the easier part. One of my favorite stories, and I saw it reflected in somebody else's recalling of, of teaching Mark Twain in Palestine. And how does it fit? So, one of my favorite stories is when I started teaching, I was handed over in Dhaka University by my professors because nobody wanted to teach. Hey, this is Firdous join করেছে. Ask her to teach Milton. So I was handed over Milton. I had passed my honors and MA without reading Milton. So I had to really delve into Milton, prepare my lectures, do everything. And as I talked in class, and the texts were wonderful, Paradise Lost. What is Eve to do with this? Where is the position of Eve? What is the attraction of Satan? All of that was very clear to me because I had studied so hard. And there was another essay called Areopagitica. This I'm talking about the late 70s, 78, 79, and which was about the freedom of speech, of not having censorship. All of, but I used to think that, all this Andolon outside, what am I doing teaching Milton? And then when I came across feminist literary theory in the person of Elaine Showalter, I don't quite agree with all the time, but at that time it was an eye-opener. I could see that this is one way. And then, of course, I read Edward Said. And Edward Said just did it for me. And that is where the question that I start with is, why are we reading this text? So then we start exploring history, we start exploring cultural politics, the way we start looking at hegemonic practices, we start looking at how we are being created as a certain kind of colonial subject, how we as colonial subjects are, what should I say, absorbing it and then transforming it in our own way. It's not that we are inert objects which take in everything. We transform it. And what do we transform it into? So literature and English literature and the literature of the colonizers became very, very interesting because it was a tool of power. And that led me to Bangla literature. It opened my eyes to how Bangla literature was taking in all these. So we have Banglar Shelley, Banglar Milton, all of these things, but they're not Milton and they're not Shelley. They are Madhusudhan and they are Rabindranath and all of that. So they are doing something with it that transforms it and makes it something. So literature suddenly became very, very exciting. It was not something that you just read for beautiful lines and beautiful things. It was stunningly important. But when it comes to activism, because most of the time we are reading Western theory, even Edward Said is based on Foucault and all of that, it is important to contextualize. It is this contextualizing aspect that brings in. So the feminism, we, you know, we we would do the typical Beauvoir thing of one is not born a woman but becomes one and all of that, and do the typical biology, sociology, uh, um, division, what is a woman, etc., etc. But it is with the queer movements, really, and queer theory that our standpoints began to be challenged in ways that I don't know that we have come to terms with. When I teach it in class, it becomes very obvious to me what performativity can lead to, how it's expressed, etc., etc. But when we come to the movement, which has been based so much on the subordination of women and women as a certain category, now that we are questioning that category, we are questioning the, the very obvious division, male, female, when we have that in between space or not, that space doesn't have to be in between. When these categories are so fluid that they don't remain anything, that is what I think. And that is the bridge we must build between the queer movement and the feminist movement. Because again, I don't think it's books that will teach us. It will be through our own conversations and dialogues. Is such a bridge possible? Is it desirable to ask the most? And if it is possible and desirable, where are the links and where do we go ahead? Because as you see, there's a lot of tension between these movements all over the world. And I'm sure it is here also. But as you know, in Bangladesh, we have solved it by the so-called third gender space. So I don't know, I like all of that, but it has opened up a space for us. And to question at least the category of what it means. Where that questioning will lead us, I don't know. It hasn't happened yet. So I find very exciting possibilities ahead of us. Yes.
Thank you. And I just must say, like, whenever you're talking about A Paradise Lost by John Milton, I don't know if you know that or not. I did my bachelor's in English literature from East West University, and I think when I read Paradise Lost, it really changed my mind. I didn't read it as a like ancient text. It was more likely the rhythm of that poem, and like there's something about this like greatness of this particular, I would say, creation really allured me. And when you were talking about John Milton, I was like, wow, that's such a nostalgic situation.
Oh, it was wonderful reading Paradise Lost
Absolutely.
because it was also like science fiction, you know,
Absolutely, yes.
worlds upon worlds,
Yeah.
planets upon planets. But I also read Madhusudhan's Meghnad Bhattacharya in its entirety, and I've written a lot about it because it ends with the Shotidaho, with the
Yeah,
video
yeah.
immolation.
Hmm.
And and he's supposed to have based himself on Milton. But when I compare, I just think Milton is so cosmic, the cosmology that he brings in.
Yeah.
And here conflicts between Lanka and
Yeah.
this, it doesn't have that cosmological thing.
Absolutely. And it starts with a shock, right? In the middle of, right? Like it doesn't have a beginning. It's just like it's the middle of like something happened, right? So the whole shockness of this particular text always I will carry on. I think another text always will be in my love book is that Dr. Foster's by uh
Ah,
Christopher Barlow. I think that's also another fantastic text that really pushed me to like to explore literature more. I always wanted to do my bachelor's under you, but it never happened. But I'm so happy we're having this conversation. But thank you so much for
I'm
your
so glad. I didn't know you were an English
well,
major.
yes,
We have
yeah.
so much in common.
Absolutely, absolutely. Whenever I'm in town next time, I will absolutely make a appointment with you, and we will talk about it. I really hope so. Okay. Um, Appa, so
Inshallah.
inshallah, yes. Appa, so what does it means to teach canonical writers like Jane Austen or postcolonial fiction in Bangladesh through a feminist lens?
Firstly, at the moment, I'm teaching E.M. Foster's A Passage to India. And I don't know whether this interview will turn out to be very literature based, but I think with two literature people here, it's bound to. And Kiar Karar. So, so in Passage to India, there are two issues that I've asked students to look at. One is the issue of rape, of a rape of a white woman by an Indian man, which turns out to be a false accusation. So, what does it mean when a woman cries rape and then it's turned out that she's making a false accusation? So, I won't get into the intricacies of the text and what the text does with it. But the whole colonial thing, that this is a colonial trope, black man versus white woman. This is something that comes from right from the 15th century, right from Shakespeare's Tempest, all that. But also, it's a highly misanthropic trope that a woman cries rape. So we don't know what that means. So we have to keep that in mind. And the other is the Aziz Fielding, or the homosocial, as they call it, how homoerotic is colonial encounter. So these are the two questions that I'm bringing up. And they're solely connected, absolutely directly, with feminism, with uh, with sexuality studies. So the canonical text is not something that is stuck in time, that is there in the early 20th century in colonial India, but has reverberations that come to this day, till today, where questions of race, gender, sexuality are raising their heads. And this is a way that we can enter the text. And given the situation in Bangladesh, I think it is much easier to approach it through fiction than any other way. You open people's minds, or people's minds are opened, but the field you have in front of you is fictional. What you do with it later is what you are doing with it, what I have done with it. But you know, yeah,
Appa, there was a little bit, I would say,
a
pause.
gap.
Can
Yeah?
you can you repeat it again? I'm sorry.
কোথায় থেকে, what was,
The, the
I was
la-
talking about teaching Foster, right?
yes, absolutely. Yes, yes,
And
yes.
did that all go away? No.
No, not all that go away. I think you have layered out two of the, I would say,
Okay, main
way.
topics.
Yes, yes.
And
And
I was just saying that in Bangladesh, for example, these are issues you hesitate to talk about directly in public spaces. So to me, fiction is just the right way to approach it, because you are looking at fiction and you're reading off things from that fiction. The other thing is that we say these canonical texts, and at one point, women, feminists dismiss these canonical texts as by dead white men. But what dead white men have written about and said has has reverberations to today. And I think the writer, the artist, actually dies the moment they create something. And that creation is what we are looking at. So, how we make it, how we read it, is again, as I said in the beginning, that it's more about the reader than about the text itself. So, the reader is very important. Yes, so my texts are alive to me, and I hope, but I'm not sure, I make it alive for my students. I don't think I do because they don't want to read.
Oh, thank you so much, Appa, and sorry for the technical trouble. I know this wasn't part of the question, but do you have any particular text that you kind of like now have this revelation that like it has a fantastic feminist, I would say, interpretation, or like you kind of like love to like to reread as a feminist text? Like, do you have any kind of favorite? You don't have to answer the question, but I'm just curious.
I cannot think of it. At one
Yeah.
point, I would say Jane Eyre or something, but no,
Okay.
no longer. It's
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah. January is expired, like,
Has
yeah.
expired.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I'm, I like in contemporary Bangla fiction. I think Shaheen Akhtar is my
Yeah.
favorite writer.
Yeah.
And her Talash is
Yeah.
something I could read and reread. And
Yeah,
yeah,
she is such a fantastic writer. Yes, absolutely recommend it. I really wanted to share like as Jane Austen's like situation came up. So I remember like when during reading Pride and Prejudice in my one of my classes, I was really annoyed by the protagonist at some point. The last half of the novel. I think that particular character, but protagonist, really served to the society and became a really, stereotypical novel, the last half. So I was like, that's why I really wanted to share that. Like, that's my issue with Jane Austen. Like, Pride and Prejudice, it started with such a great Elizabeth, the protagonist, right? Such a strong character. And later, when they got, you have different opinion about it. Maybe other folks have it.
no, I don't have a different. I was disappointed.
Disappointed, right? Okay, great. Thank you. I remember my professor was really disappointed at me and was like, why you were making this is a big issue? I was like, okay, fine. But I am really angered that like why Elizabeth has to like to go with Mr. Darcy. I'm sorry. We are kind of like, moved from our usual interview questions. So my next question for you.
Uh,
In your view, what role can literature play in shaping feminist political struggles?
I think firstly, uh, it has to be literature in our own language. So I'm now in the executive board of Bangla Academy. And I don't know whether I will be able to play any other, or the Bangla Academy will be able to change and do things. But one of the things that they could do, and I wish it would be done, was bring out something like the North mythology, of Bangla writing. And again, Shaheen Akhtar has done this very well in her three-volume anthology of writing by and about women. So it's not just by women, but about women. So in that, you will find in this by and about women is very interesting. Writing about women is everything is about women. So you can read anything and see how women are represented in it. But when you read writings by women, one of the first questions that arises is it different from, is it different? I don't know that it's different, but it's a site from where you can look for women's wishes, desires, how women themselves express these things, whether through metaphor and all of that stuff, or whether directly. So I think there is a huge need to read women's writings. And in Bangla, there is a whole genre of folk writing including songs, etc., Meli Ganam. All of that is written in a very formulaic manner sometimes. But within that, you can read women's needs and desires, especially things like Bir Ganan, which women sing, women perform for women, and how and on the threshold of somebody's so-called sexual awakening, and what are the fears, what are the excitements that they are standing on. So I think, yes, there is a huge way we can read literature. Our mainstream literature, beginning from Bonkim right down to Shamsul Haq and all of that, is very woman oriented. Is It talks about women and perhaps gives a space where, think of Rabindranath's Hore Baire, for instance. It just it opens up the world of nationalist freedom, women's freedom altogether. So it's all there, and and we need to anthologize it. We need to put it together in a way that traces, uh, writing by and of women. There are wonderful anthologies. There is Zanana Mahfil, this anthology of Muslim women's writings. So I really, before I didn't like this, but I really believe in historicizing, in anthologizing, and putting together, and so that young women from all over Bangladesh can come across these books and make something of them it themselves. It's a very rich historical and imaginary documentation of what we want.
Thank you, Apa. And also shout out to Jana Mahfil, like it's an anthology from University of Press Limited, right? Like published by University of Press Limited. Yeah. Um, so my next question is for you, is that how did your involvement in the Forgotten Woman of 1971 project begin, and why was it significant for feminist movements?
If I want to talk about the I'll talk about the forgotten women, but I want to talk about the movements in Naripokkho which have um, touched, shaped me the most. There are a lot of them. So if I could just do a kind of
Absolutely, it's
chronology.
your oral history interview. Do whatever makes you
Okay.
feel
No,
okay.
and then come to,
Yes,
kind of
absolutely,
put
Apa.
that at the end, that the finale, as it were.
Okay.
And so Naripokkho, when it began the issue that came up most was violence, was physical attack on women. So we spent a lot of time in defining violence, in expanding the definition, in contracting the definition, in um, in uh, in dialogue and dispute with other women's groups, especially the Oikoboddho Nari Samaj, because we felt they were only talking about law and order, where we thought it was a systemic, structural issue, etc., etc. Then we wanted to contract it that, everything, discrimination, deprivation, all of it is coming against Shohingshota or violence. You have the violence on one side, and this, all of this we were discussing. And behind it all were two understandings, that when we talk about women, we only talk about improving their condition. We do not talk about changing their position. So in Bangla, we used to say obostha. Obosthar unnoti korte raji achi. Obosthan, to transform their position in society. So how does one do that? And one of the earliest movements we were involved in as a group was the anti-Eighth Amendment to the Constitution of Bangladesh, which was making Islam the state religion. And we were the group that came out, this is in 1988, most strongly for a secular state. We based it on many, many things. But the main thing we brought out was the equality or the equal rights of all citizens, regardless of religion. So if the state is going to prioritize one religion over another, this equality is. And as far as religion is concerned, we thought that it was a private matter. We had said that যার ধর্ম তার কাছে রাষ্ট্রের কি বলার আছে. We talked about secularism as a very, in the very French Revolution way of the term, separation of the state from religion. But in Bangladesh and in the Indian subcontinent as a whole, secularism is understood as multi-faith, that everybody, and we have the Quran, the Bible, and the Gita, and everything together. That also has its points and good points, but we had taken this very strict separation of state and religion. And I think that was an important movement because firstly, it brought this collective that we were making into public limelight. So suddenly we were public, we were out there, and we were challenging something very boldly, religion. We weren't challenging religion, but we were seen to be challenging religion as a whole. And that is something that has stayed in us. What do we mean by religion? What do we mean by our own attitude towards religion, etc., etc.? Because willy-nilly, it guides many aspects of our lives. And we have been, I think, still involved in breaking this down. And one of our slogans now is that the state has to be ihojagotik, that means this worldly, based on this world, or secular. The society has to be secular, and the individual has to be all-inclusive. So in a way, we've been trying to break this down, but it is a knotty question, as you see. The second movement that really, I think, whoever was in Naripokkho at that time and was involved, really changed all of us from the inside, was the sex workers movement. Which began as a movement against the threat of eviction from the brothels, firstly in Tanbajar and then in Nimtoli. So all through the 90s, we were involved in organizing sex workers. And that really, for the first time, Naripokkho is always being accused, and I think feminists are always being accused of being middle class, Dhaka-based, not just middle class, elitist, even, all of that. But this time, this movement brought us not just face to face, hand in hand with women who have been completely ostracized and thrown out of society. And so the public movement had its high points, and one of the biggest achievements, we think, of that movement is that in most journalists, nobody uses the word prostitute anymore. Everybody says Jonakormi or sex worker, etc. We were also we also won a court case, which is, I think somebody should really write about it in detail, a lawyer, that where the judge said that sex the brothels are licensed places where women can live and work freely. So you can imagine that that is a landmark case. But at the level of rights, we did manage to establish certain things. But at the level of where we were moved, I think, where we were touched most was at the level of sharing our stories. And I don't know how much we have not gone public with those, because that was a sharing of life stories, and where sexuality, sexual arrangements of society, all of that played a big role. And so we have this two attitudes to sex workers. One is they're bad women, and the other is poor things. They have been driven into this. They were kidnapped or something. They have an equally very bad impression of the mainstream movement. They think we have boring, dead lives. And in this conversation, we saw that nobody is us and them. We are all women together. All our lives have some kind of barriers, some kind of oppressions, some, whether it be mental, physical, whatever, which defines us. So this notion of the way, and Foucault comes alive here, society organizes sex, not sexuality, sex itself has a huge impact on how identities are formed, how lives are lived, etc. So this was just really first-hand experience, first-hand involvement, which I think was very good for the women involved in the movement, because that separation, which we all have somewhere, broke down. And yeah, that was a very important moment for us. I feel that people who have not, I shouldn't say this, but people who have not been part of this kind of things will be very difficult. We've had lots of other movements such as acid violence, etc., etc. But these are the two movements, as far as I'm concerned, that shaped my thinking. How are women being addressed by the state? So it's women in the state, in the constitution, as it were, and where that is. And how are women being shaped? Not just individual lives of women and where we are led by fate and by circumstance, but socially, structurally, how that affects us. And that brings me to our thing that is going on, the most difficult program that we have are the Forgotten Women of 71. And the Forgotten Women of 71 are the women who were raped in 1971. And how the Bangladesh state forgot them, how history has ignored them, and how we as feminists have overlooked them. Because we started this in 2011. How many years after independence? 40 years after independence. So imagine we are a feminist group. We know all of this, but it took us that long to 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 even reach out and meet these women and be with them. That program, which is ongoing, and I'm going to make a special appeal in this interview, is that it has been going on. It's still on, and it is a three-pronged thing. So the first prong, as it were, is to just stand by these women, is to identify them, to bring them forward, and stand by them, meet their daily needs. Because we have women who are totally impoverished, who are totally and now are very old and living in very dire circumstances, who need medical help, who need nutritional help. I don't know how much you could give after all these many years of all of that. They're my age, but they're absolutely, I mean, I'm sure I look very old, but they look much, much older, I think. Secondly, to document their lives, to create an archive, as you are, of forgotten stories. And I'll tell you the problems at each step of the way. And the third was something of reparation and redress. And in each case, I think we are not very successful. In the first case, we've had, over the years, we've had about 100+ women whom we have supported and looked after. In 2016, the government brought out a scheme of recognizing Viranganas as Mohila Mukti Jodha and bracketed Nari Mukti Jodha, bracketed Virangana. And some of the women managed to get registered and so are under the government scheme. And many of the women have died in the meantime. And we have now in our rota 50 women, but we know of more. But we are not able to raise enough funds for these women. So we have stopped ourselves that janleo amra amader liste anbo na, because we can't do what we are doing. We can help in other ways individually and all that, but as Naripokkho. So we give 8,000 a month to 50 women, and that we are unable to raise this money. Every month we are looking for money. We have come to the stage of jekhane jai hat pati, kichu den amaderke. So this is the appeal I'm making over this video as well. We need donations to look after these women. We are trying to reach out to institutional funding because we haven't taken much institutional funding. Okay, the second problem that we have, that of documentation. We have done some documentation. We have interviewed the women with us. We have made 3 films, one by Dipto TV, one by a filmmaker called Tanha, and one by Naripokkho itself, our filmmaker is Rehana Samdani. But one of the problems that we are facing is, should we put this up online? And because our film was filmed, the Naripokkho film, in Charghat in Rajshahi, and we had a public showing there because we have taken consent from everybody, all the interviewees. But one of the women was upset. She said, now amar elakaye shobai amar goppo jane. And so we don't know whether to. So we don't know what to do with this documentation. It's not consent diye diyeche. But even at the age of 70+, there are repercussions for these women in their communities, and how public can we be with it. So I think we need to talk to you further about how to put it in the public space, but where does the things come from? So that is one thing that we are really facing. It's really very, very difficult, and the ethical issues are we have lovely pictures and photographs and all of that, which we want to have an exhibition. But at this moment, we are very, and I know other people have done it. They've done these exhibitions without this long-term involvement that we have had. But with our long-term involvement, we are not being But the documentation is happening, ups and downs. We had one of our people had taken the interviews and never given it to us. So we have lost the interviews with many women. We have some, and we can continue with this on our own time and own resources as much as we can. But we've had some help in this year, some donor funding by which we made the Naripokkho film. And the third year of redress and has been the most slow. Since that 2016, when the government issued this, there's Jamukha in the Liberation War Ministry, which endorses their things. They have to go through them. So if you look at the process, you will be absolutely scandalized by how terrible the process is. These women have to go to various offices, including the district commissioners, to prove that they were raped in 1971. Can you imagine? And where we are working, we can help. But even then, after all of that, during the AL period, it used to go to that office and you'd have to give, these poor women would have to bribe. And TIB has done a, a, a survey on this, a report on this, on how Viranganas are registered. And our stand was, no, we're not going to give up that. And so it doesn't happen. And the women themselves, they take a khudro rin and they bribe and they get their things, and that's how they get registered. And we say that the moment you do this, then this questioning of whether you're real or not will arise. With this government, the interim government, everybody in Jamukha is a friend. They're old Mukti Jodhas, and they're my friends. So we have approached them with a list, but they've done nothing. They're saying, the first instance, they were just Bhua Mukti Jodhaderke bad dicchil. And now they're only concerned with the July Jodhas. So they are really forgotten. These women are forgotten. And struggling for them and with them. And the state recognition is so important because every time a Birangana has died, we have organized that kind of, with national anthem, with the national flag and everything. But if they're not registered by the government, this will not be given to them. Even in death, some recognition. It means a lot for their families if their families are there. The other shortcoming here is that all the women we have talked to and met, and there are women in brothels who are Biranganas, there are women in, who are living, who are being shunted from one child to the other, living in utter abjection and poverty. These are the Biranganas we met. But the middle class Birangana has not come up and said. And so আমাদের যে ফিরদৌসী প্রিয় ভাষিনী ছিলেন, she was really an iconic person. She's really brave. She's really someone. Those are the kinds of voices that need to be heard also, because nobody is going to. I hate to say that we are a very class-based society, and we can only speak for the Biranganas. I don't know how much people will listen to them, but if we can show our films, I think people will listen. How much we should show our films is our question.
Thank you so much. And absolutely, I would love to have a conversation after this about we need to work together to make sure our feminist histories are out there, right? So I would love to have a conversation. And thank you so much for doing this work, Appa. I really, really appreciate this. And thank you so much for this initiative. My utmost respect towards you.
But please help us with
Oh,
donations if you can.
absolutely, absolutely.
If you're abroad and see whether you
Absolutely.
can
I
send
will
it.
know more about it from you, and then we can come up with something. I think there's something can be done. So let's talk about it whenever it's convenient. Great. And thank you so much for
So
sharing.
we were talking about history, memory, and all of that. So one of the things I feel is that women are written out of history. You know, the word Virangana is something Viranganas don't like to use because it has become a word of abuse, something that was given to them and very early by Kamruzaman, who was then the home minister. Even in December 71, on 22nd December 71, just after independence, people don't use the word Virangana. They want to be called Naripokkho. And one of the effects of this is that people who were Nari Mukti Jodhas do not now want to be called Nari Mukti Jodhas because that means they're Virangana. So every word is used to categorize women in ways that demeans them. Even even the other day, one of my favorite advisors said that we had got independence on by the honor of these women, by the loss of honor. Tariq Zia said the other day that Jamaat participated in the taking away the honor of these women. So taking away the honor, we have really, like we have tried to change the word Jonokurmi and Besha to Jonokurmi. We have tried to do away with this concept of the loss of honor. It is not a loss of honor. It is a crime committed on their bodies, and it is a crime committed for the independence of this country because they were trying to demean us. So we have to, so we want the word Virangana back. So in many ways, this ties up with many of our other. We have a wonderful poster called Loraita Bhashar. So how women are addressed is so important. So this language, the terms that we use, is so important. And we don't want to use the word Virangana. And a difference is being made between, women's history is written only giving the, should I say, giving the loss of honor aspect. Where were women fighting? But I think this crime that was committed on women is very important, and it must be recognized and it must be honored. And that is why Talash is one of my favorite novels. There, the sister is a Virangana, and the brother is a Mukti Jodha who died. The parents are very proud of their son, and they are hiding their daughter. This is really the history. So history, memory, how women are erased from memory. And then if you go on forward, you will see how women are being kept out, even in the constitution, even in the social structures, and even in national movements. If July is a very good example of it, July, when women were celebrated for being in the front line, for coming out, really, while the men were behind uh, police barriers. So women were out. And today, where are the women? There are no women in the picture. So yesterday was Rokia Day, and we are looking for women to honor. But these women who are out of the streets are being forgotten. And it is left again, when we grumble a lot about this, and I keep on saying it's up to those women to reorganize, become another Naripokkho, and take the struggle forward, because it is not going to be done by the state or by society. We cannot wait for that. We have to do it ourselves. This is a recognition that we women must have, that we have to organize ourselves, fight for our rights. Nobody else would do it for us. And if you look at the Commission report, if I think, I don't know whether you have access to it. It's in the ministry website. But the Nari Commission, I think, has given the most far-reaching, the most transformative report ever, which includes recognition of sex work as work, which includes a whole section on Viranganas, which talks about secularism as the basis of the constitution and the state, etc. But the Nari Commission report has been ignored by the government and maligned by people. So attacks have been made. Shireen has been, personally maligned and abused, and no protection or anything was available to her. The Utkomoto Commission has no recognition of the Nari thing. So all our demands for, 50% of seats in the national parliament ignored. Now I think only 3% of candidates so far announced are women.
Well, Appa, it's such a shame, and also, um, I was so shocked to see how this particular government has reacted to the attacks on the Women's Commission, right? And that was really sad that like they didn't say anything and they didn't, protect the
There
oh
was total silence.
yeah.
And
And
when they handed over the report, Yunus said that Bangladesh will show the world how women can be. So he was so happy with the report. And the
and
next day he forgot.
Forgot, yeah. I really wanted to quote from Dr. Iftikhar Zaman because he said recently that like when vulgar campaigns using obscene language began against the Women's Commission report and when commission members face security risks, I appealed not just over WhatsApp. I approached at least 7 advisors directly. I told them that at very least the government should make its position clear in support of the report and they didn't do anything. And
And this was a commission they commissioned.
absolutely, yes.
And this
And
commission report is on the government website.
yeah,
So
and it's so heartbreaking to see that like in this particular time we are thinking about like we are saying like new revelation, like aftermath of the revelation, new beginning, and it feels like it's all old stuff but in a new packaging, right? And absolutely it's heartbreaking to see like how and I think the one memory and that one photograph will always engrave in my memory is that like and this is such a shameful thing to do is that I think that there's a rally happened in Sharadil Dan and they kind of put Sheen Appa's face and with some
yeah,
shoes and stuff as well. And I think I woke up in the morning, I saw this on the news feed, and it really irked my heart. I was like, this is something she doesn't deserve it. Also, the people who are involved in the Nari Commission, or also who are involved in feminist movements, the scrutiny they face every day, even yesterday, like the Rokia Day, people are making such a obscene amount of comments and such a bad and derogatory comments about Wickham Rokia. And the people who are involved with that is such a sad time we're witnessing. I'm sorry to say that, but it just shattered my heart. I'm not surprised, but it just hard to,
yeah,
accept.
but so that is the thing, that I don't know how much these are political.
Yep,
It is political, but it is also deeply ingrained in our society.
absolutely. The
So I don't know
misogyny.
where.
Yeah.
Mhm. And somebody is posting on Facebook And it's amazing that when Rukia established her school, the papers read Jubuti Bidhoba মেয়েদের স্কুল খুলেছেন. So, যুবতী বিধবা মেয়েদের school. All of this is kind of steeped in misogyny. That's all they could say about her was she's a Jubuti.
And the way she's been depicted as, like, she used her husband's name, and, like, with the husband's will, she kind of did that, like those whole
That was
misrepresentation.
her inheritance.
Yeah,
She
absolutely,
gave her
right.
husband's name because
Yeah.
she acknowledged that she inherited this money from him.
Absolutely. And the misrepresentation and misinterpretation right now going around through, like, Begum Rukia, and it's very sad. It's very sad to witness, and I don't know. There's a sudden.
But at the same time,
Yes,
while
please.
all this is happening, the women's movement and all the groups, whoever they are, big, small, and a sizable number of the public have stood firmly. So there was no division saying, hey, what have you asked for here and what have you asked for there? People have just stood by it. And that is very heartening, I
Absolutely,
must.
yes, and that's really should be celebrated. I really do agree with you. So,
And that's what I also feel that, instead of paying attention to all of this, we have to pay attention to all of this
absolutely.
because we have to look at our safety and security. We should just go on messaging. We get a bit, one of the things we always say is that fear is the biggest thing. So fear should not be used. We should go ahead, and we should go ahead together. This that famous song Akla Cholo Re, I just don't believe in it. You cannot Akla Cholo. You have to be organized, you have to be collectivized, you have to have people with you. And that is feminist organizing. That is what all organizing is, that you have a standpoint, but you cannot just say that, oh, nobody is listening to me and I'll go ahead. You must make people listen to you and agree with you and, go
Thank you.
ahead.
And that's the beauty of the intersectional feminist movement as well. The feminist movement, the labor, the indigenous movement, queer movement, everything getting
Yes.
together. And we are talking about misogyny and also patriarchy and the system, which kind of, like, right now monetize us. So thank you so much, Appa, for your.
One thing I forgot to say
Yes,
when you
absolutely.
mentioned the labor movement is I think, I don't know how far it'll go, but I would like to consider it a success. Is we are putting the sex workers movement together with the women in labor movement. So we've had some dialogues, a number of dialogues, and we are putting this so that the labor movement recognizes sex workers as sex. There was a lot of resistance because women in work are, tagged, as they say these days, as sexually deviant, as sexually disrespectable. So there was, but some windows are opening up. So if that happens, that will be a great, great milestone. So making these linkages are so
Oh,
important.
absolutely. And thank you so much for doing that. So, Appa, how do you see the tensions between Islam, secularism, and feminism playing out today?
I find this question very difficult.
Okay.
At one point, I would have said uh, Islam is like the bogey there out there, and we must resist it. But I won't say that anymore. I think Islam has aspects of it which are quite empowering for women. I don't think women who are practicing Muslims, who are even part of Islamic movements, are stooges in a way that they do not realize where their interests lie. Somewhere, maybe spiritually, maybe in practical terms, Islam gives them something. So I've been looking at the phenomenon of veiling, of putting on the hijab. And one of the things I realize is that the hijab has become so normalized that it's not even a thing to talk about anymore. I I go to my Shushubari village quite a lot. My husband is buried there, and I have some dealings with the school girls there. They're all hijabbed, and now they're becoming niqabus. But they're so chotpote. They're like, this is in outside Brahmanbadia. So they go to Brahmanbadia, and then they come back like us. We were told to come back before dark, wherever we went when we were in class 9 and 10. They come back before dark, but they are dressed like that. So I don't see much difference. We used to say that cholone bolone, like in the way we walk, in the way we dress, and the way we speak, we must be very bold. And I've seen women, climb up onto buses and all that dressed any way they are. So there's something else that is happening. And and it is not just an Islamization, it is a change of habitus in a way. It is a change in self awareness because I don't see a real difference in that way. And I find that these girls, not the women so much, but the younger girls, are much more aware and out there than, than one would expect, than there was even in my generation. In my generation, there were a handful of women. But now, because of greater mobility, because of education, because of more women at work, women are out there, no matter how they are dressed. But if we think of political Islam, I get very concerned, because if the ideology is translated into some kind of atavistic policy, then it will be very bad. But I don't think we need Islamic parties to do that. I have a feeling that the mainstream parties will be doing it themselves. So, Islam or not, I think progress should be thought of in more scientific terms, that will be educated, will be up with things, etc., etc. So there is a tension, but I'm not being able to say this is the tension. The thing I don't like about Islam in the public sphere is that it makes differences between the polity. So a Hindu and a Muslim are seen differently. So it creates divisions. So instead of which we should not be creating divisions, we should be inclusive. There are certain things that are considered haram in Islam, which I don't think are considered haram in Islam. They just say that. And so I don't want a very strong religious. Yeah, but I think along with the strong religious thing, we will also have a strong scientific political thing going on. So I am not being able to say it very well because I'm not very clear in my head about it. But for women, I think secularism is very important because we need a level of not of equality as sameness, but a level at which we are viewed with as people with the same rights and people who have to have the same opportunities. So be it in sports, I'm so glad that Porno got the Rokia Award yesterday. The woman, Rubana, who got it for research, was for scientific research. I'm very happy Kalpana Akhtar got it for labor rights. So these are the places where I think we cannot afford to make women not come forward. We have to have these arenas open for women. I don't know whether that answers your question, because
Yeah.
I don't want to fall into this phobia thing that I'm scared, I'm scared, I'm scared. We are all in that.
And
But
also, it's a really tough question to answer in in the context of Bangladesh right now because it's such a it's a like a pot or like a
mm,
hodgepodge right now. So we do not know where this is going or not, right? Like we cannot do a forecast. So you're absolutely right, Appa, and I
but
appreciate
I think is whatever it is, women have to keep on talking about their rights, no matter
no matter
where
what.
the state is going. We have to keep on talking. It's nobody else will do it for us.
Okay. Thank you so much, Appa. So, my next question is to you. What strengths and contradictions have you observed across different generations of feminist organizing in Bangladesh?
Um, Before us was Mahila Purishad, and their strength came from their strength and their weakness came from the same place. They were like the left, uh, the women's wing of the leftist movement. So they drew a lot of strength from that movement. But also, what they lost is a sense of autonomy. So they were the women's wing. But over the years, Munda Purishad um, has cut this year or are no longer so strongly under the influence of and are forging their own way. But what they have got from the past is a large organization spread all across the country. And that is their strength. But I think they were not, they were, I should say this, because they were the first people to point out the personal laws and the constitution and all that, of that was very, very important. And the Uniform Civil Code that they have been fighting for from the beginning. They have had a strong voice in many things, but a lot of it has been from party political perspectives, and that was uh, a weakness. And also, we know how the left has been co-opted by the AL forces. So we also know that Bakshar and all that. So it became murky for them. We arrived in the scene in 1983, and I think our strength was that we were not politically aligned. We were not politically aligned, and we had, especially in the past, the ability to voice, I think maybe because we were more naive, things that were not very popular and which went against the grain. And so we could come across, let us say, a famous uh, case that came up in 1989, I think, which was the Rima Hotta, the Rima murder. The Rima was murdered by her husband, Munir, who was the son of very prominent doctors in the country. So, of course, the next day, and 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 he had a lover called Kuku, who was not of that class. So the popular slogan became Hashi Chai. And we wrote a strong, Shirin and I together wrote a strong way that we are not just against the death sentence, but that in this case, there's a miscarriage of justice. There is this is, not premeditated murder. This is something that was done on the spur of the moment. And we were accused of having been bribed by the parents of the boy. We said Kuku was not even on the scene. So why is she being implicated? Because they said that it was. So with the result, Kuku was let free because she. But we were also identified. These are the cuckoos of the women's movement, and so we stood against the mainstream women's movement at that point. And I think that kind of spirit that we had, I think, all through the 80s, the 90s, really helped spur us on. All the movements I've talked about was all of that. Our weakness, if I want to say, is we have become more institutionalized. We have had to enroll ourselves in various government, the Mohila Mantranalaya and the NGO Bureau, all of this. So what has happened is that we have to follow these structures, and that takes up a lot of our time because we had thought of Naripokkho as a voluntary organization where we'd give our voluntary time. And I want to say that this hybrid thing of voluntary and professional is a strength and a weakness because it takes away spontaneity somewhere because we are too bound by rules. But then being bound by rules has a very good effect. You know what you're doing, you are accountable, you're doing all those things. So Duto Milie, I think, of course, Naripokkho and I think the women's movement itself has to think of ways to include younger women. Here again, I am in a bit of a dilemma. Should we include younger women or let younger women organize themselves as they are? But yeah, the new women's organizations that are coming up are mostly web-based. And so this is the new reality. But I think there is a weakness here. The being in person, being in Rajshahi or in a small town like Kurigram, etc., being there physically is much more important. It touches lives, it touches things. I don't know how much their spread is, how much their their spread is really, or how much it is bunches of friends. But I think the new movements are also more open to other movements like the indigenous movement, the environmental movement, queer movements. So that is their strength. So I think how it's going is good, but it needs to think of Bangladesh as a whole, which Mohila Parishad, Naripokkho were very involved in doing, not our comfort zone, but reaching out and involving and including lots of people in the organ, in the movement. That's what I think.
Thank you, Appa. So looking ahead, what vision do you hold for the future of feminist activism in Bangladesh?
Um, Feminist activism will be the spur to make women bold, active, to make women introspective as well. So it will be it will encourage women, or it will not encourage, it will make women use their brains, their bodies, their hearts, everything. Because one thing about the women's movement as a whole, it is said that the emotional lives of women are ignored in all this whole notion of love and desire and all of that women do not talk about. You know, even the way we dress makes us certain kind of women. We don't put lots of makeup and da da da. Maybe we will allow, maybe all of that will happen. Women will be free to be however they want to be, free to be. So yeah, so I think of it as a movement that frees women to be. So we talk about rights, we talk about things, but freedoms, the freedoms that everybody should have is the freedom. So I don't know whether I'm talking about organizing, I'm talking about the end of organizing. But if we organize with that spirit, with boldness, and Bolin, if the revolution, you cannot dance, you don't want that revolution. So you can dance, be happy, be joyful, something that celebrates women and opens up new avenues for them, or all avenues.
Thank you, Professor Firdous Azim. Do you want to have any kind of closing remarks for us?
I want you to make some closing
I
remarks
will do
because,
that, but then again, before
okay,
that, if you want to like to say something.
I think this is a very, very good um, initiative, and I'm very happy that you have taken it up because our voices, I don't know how useful they are, but being recorded is very good and archived because, I mean, even for me, being able to say what I've said, and I didn't realize that I was so steeped in literature that you had to actually guide me outside literature to talk about the movement. So that was quite eye opening for me. But I wish you and I wish the women's movement a lot of success. And I hope we live in a world where we're all on an equal and an equally free footing
Oh,
than ever before.
absolutely. Thank you so much for those really nice and kind words. Um, as you say, like archiving or recording, like when I was growing up, I was also looking for these recordings that, like, to like to develop my feminist consciousness, right? So I hope like these recordings will help the future generation or the generation are right now looking for those, Bangladeshi feminist questions. So they will see this particular video and they will have that, kind of like, knowledge or have experience with knowledge. But that's how we are doing archiving. That's why archiving is historic. So, Professor Firdous Azim, thank you so much for your generosity, your commitment, and your enduring presence in Bangladesh feminist landscape. Your work has made it possible for many of us to imagine a different ways of doing resistance, resisting, and becoming. To all of you watching, thank you so much for joining us. And this is Bangladesh Feminist Oral History Project, a living record of voices that have fought to make space for all our future. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and support the Bangladesh Feminist Archives as we continue this journey of documenting feminist stories, struggles, and solidarities. Thank you so much, Firdous Appa, again, and thank you all for being with us.
Thank you, Tanvir.